Good afternoon, everybody. Hamza, a very warm welcome to you. Maybe a starting question from me. We've heard a lot in the past two sessions about the potential of Morocco. Tell me a little bit about the Milat Group in South Africa and make a case for South Africa and why you think there is enormous potential there. Maybe start off by telling us what your organization is doing.
So before I, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, before I, you see, I was so excited with the question that you asked me. You clearly have the speed pulse right. But let me answer the question, because I think it's a very important question for people to understand. And the answer, in my view, is this. Travel works extensively where there's base business. Where there is no base business and you have to have that base business, you're building a business on shifting sands. And this is not me being pro-South Africa, right? But South Africa has one thing going for it. South Africans spend in their own economy. South Africa has a very robust domestic travel tourism sector. South Africans go to Cape Town. South Africans go to Durban. South Africans constitute today what is the largest part of that country's GDP. Now, Morocco is an incredibly beautiful country. I think has a compelling case. But if you look at the Moroccan thesis, most of it relies on Europe and its proximity to Europe. And what concerns me is if there's one flu which happens in Morocco, that sneeze means there's a broader piece in. And the African story can't just be driven on one pocket of success. My view has always been the African story needs to be collective. It can't just be a South African story, Moroccan story. But domestic resilience is very important, and I think that's the one difference between South Africa and Morocco. South Africa has strong domestic resilience.
And Mr. Faruqi, you talk a good game here, but let me put this to you, that global institutional investors still remain cautious. The language, as we've heard today and yesterday, is about risk, uncertainty, and track record. How do you overcome that negative perception?
So
if you agree that it exists.
So I do agree with the thesis, right? Institutional capital does not like, understand, or know of Africa, right? Go look at the large managers. We've had some great events. Everyone talks of Africa, but none of the large institutional managers who allocate capital today come to Africa. The challenge is why? It's just not on the radar. There's this perception of a risk premium being too high. And that's a function of Africa having a half-hearted approach to the sector, a half-hearted approach.
Half-hearted means not unified, is that what you're saying?
It's fragmented. We'll do one hotel here, two hotels here. This business today doesn't work anymore on one nice hotel, one brand fixing the problems.
It's all about scale.
It's over. It's scale, and it's about building the next define of movement. What did Dubai get right? Dubai got the movement of people. Dubai connected the dots. Dubai took an aviation strategy and connected people, took advantage of its location. Africa, unfortunately, hasn't done that, right? Because we're still trying to figure out visa issues, policy issues. Then you've got risk, which is priced in just abnormally high. You've got institutional investors who, by the way, are now discovering the Middle East. And they're coming to the Middle East because of the sovereigns who have created that enabling framework. Now that capital is coming in. Africa has to make a very conscious decision. Does it want to attract that capital? Is it going to focus on the right jockeys? Is it going to focus on that execution? And that, for me, is what Milat's next frontier focuses. That is what Milat is about. That is what I'm working incredibly hard in my organization to change, to redefine. And that is what keeps me up at night.
So what specifically are you doing to unlock that potential?
Well, the first thing is I had to build a track record and capability, right? You can't ask for capital if you don't know what to do with it, right? Today, we operate a network of globally branded hotels. We own these assets, we have developed these assets, and we operate them.
And these are big brands.
Right? And we have done them because we knew that the big brands can't solve for Africa on their own. They'll give you some framework, but if you on your own don't understand this business, if you on your own aren't going to build a thesis, aren't going to figure out domestic, aren't going to figure out, listen, the reliance on OTAs aren't there, the need for tech stack, if you aren't going to get those pieces and also understand capital formation, you're not going to crack the code.
Let me come at you with another negative, though, if I can. How do you build or demonstrate reliability within this thesis where political cycles on the continent are volatile and often regulatory framework is uncertain?
So I can give you the philosophical answer, and I've learned this the hard way. Sometimes you have to focus on what you can do, and you have to put your trust in the creator. Working in Africa and knowing the African space very well, I've learned that entrepreneurs need to stay far away from government, politics, focus on execution. I'm a great believer in what the American system gives, meritocracy. I'm a firm believer that if you can execute, if you can deliver what you say you do, capital will follow. Can government play a role in an enabling framework? Yes. But not everyone is as fortunate to be from this part of the world, right? And I think in Africa, governments are going to realize over time that if they want to fix their GDPs, if they want to create FDI, they are going to have to deal with policy uncertainty. Hopefully, the pain, mistakes, and the need and the desires of populations to change their fortunes, to change that cycle of low growth is going to happen, and they're going to understand the need to enable private capital, private entrepreneurs to come in and really build something meaningful. And I'm hoping that happens.
So you have to develop a certain appetite for risk, is what you're saying. Otherwise, you're dead in the water.
I think it's risk for appetite, but also have a big picture view, right? This continent, I think, is going to define the next frontier. This continent, if you look at 2050, the next 20, 30 years, 1 in 3 travelers is going to emerge from Africa. So I'm a great believer. I'm a great believer that Africa is going to change the fortunes of this part of the world, because the GCC and the UAE can build all of this infrastructure, right? The feeder markets are coming from where? It's Africa. Go look at what Emirates is doing. Half of the traffic which is feeding that network into Europe, into Asia, it's actually emanating from Africa. Most of these countries can't figure out a national airline. Who's filling in that gap? It's the GCC carriers. So I'm a great believer in that corridor. I'm a great believer in those pieces of Africa, execution, that corridor all coming together and creating something meaningful. Is it challenging? Is it risky? Are there government uncertainties? Yes. But you know what? That's in any sector.
Predicated, of course, on those countries within the corridor being able to knit together a cohesive strategy. You spoke a little earlier about fragmentation. Difficult to pull all of that together, or do you sense that it's starting to happen?
The awareness is there, but that's again...
You can't build a business on awareness. You need more than that.
Sure, and that's where Africa has to pick up the pace. Africa has to understand the world thinks in unified blocks. When the Europeans think, they don't just say Italy. They think of Schengen. They think of the EU. When North America speaks, they speak as a bloc. When the GCC speaks, they don't just say UAE. They speak of one united front. They understand that if one rises, everyone rises. And that, again, is something I'm very passionate about, right? People ask me what business, what legacy are we trying to build? I'm trying to fix an ecosystem because Africa has to understand it's got to think as one collected space. I believe South Africa is a great start because it's got the most developed infrastructure. It's the lowest hanging fruit. You're going to get scale. Do I see from that success growth into East and West? Absolutely. Do I see that as the platform for inter-Africa growth in inter-traffic? Yes. But we've got to start seeing that, right? We've got to start seeing government and policymakers seeing that, united front inter-Africa piece going in. There was this whole thing of Yamoussoukro decision to improve airlift. That was just a policy which never got implemented. More needs to happen. But if Africa just even gets 5% right, I think the impact it's going to have in its economies, in people's lives, and its ability to connect those corridors is going to be very meaningful.
Within your context, Hamza, what does scale actually mean?
I think when you can really start controlling pieces of the supply chain. I'm a great believer that in the next 3 to 5 years, the distribution model in our business is going to change. AI, I think, is significantly going to change how people discover hotels and discover destinations. I'm a firm believer that what sits out today, let me open a hotel, let me put a brand, and I'll just get an OTA and get 60% of my business from there. I think that's going to change. I see the desire that the customers today have for experience, the desire that customers have to be appreciated, the desire that they have for nature, good food. Africa is going to provide that. That discovery is going to become even more pronounced with what AI and agentic AI provides. My belief is all of those pieces create a very compelling case for what the future holds for the region and for the continent.
How far down the line do you think we are in terms of providing that transparent data, which you suggest is so critical to the growth of the industry?
I think from an Africa standpoint, it's not there, but that's why Millat is at.
But there's recognition thereof.
There is, and that's why one of my theses is to sort of create those awarenesses, right? One of the reasons why I've recently taken a seat at the World Travel and Tourism Council is to start building that awareness, is to start mobilizing that data, right? And this is not because Millat just has a thesis, but because we need to raise that agenda for Africa. But I think that awareness is coming in. We're very lucky we're living on an era where these pieces are becoming very relevant. But do I believe they're going to dislocate the core of the industry, the human piece? No. But they are going to be very important enablers. Industry needs to understand these enablers, plug them in, and make them meaningful.
I hear you use words like must, can, and should, which is all very important. But in the short term, and I'm talking the next 3 to 5 years, what will signal a move from promises to proof points?
Closure. I believe in the next 6 to 12 months, and I can speak from a Millat standpoint, we are trying to reshape the future of African hospitality. We are sitting at the cusp of what we have done over the last, I say this very commonly, I've been sitting in the laboratory for the last 4 years. We are at the cusp of, hopefully, inshallah, with God's help, going to build something very meaningful. And I think what's going to come out is business, a story, a thesis which is going to be very compelling, and I think in the region where there needs to be serious change and impact.
What's the one big fear you believe you need to address when it comes to international investors to allay them?
I think there's a need for conviction and trust. The asset managers and the global private equity funds, unfortunately, have been used to sitting on the fence. And I think that also needs to change. My view is capital needs to be deployed with conviction. Capital can't be deployed with half strings in. Africa can't also be a begging bowl, right? Africa can't be coming in and saying, give me, Africa's not a charity case. We have the youngest population in that part of the world, which, by the way, is connected, traveling. If you look at the volume of Africa feeding other destinations, there's a real business.
And a vibrant, growing, ambitious middle class
Absolutely.
that wants to travel, right?
Absolutely. So my view is if we can tap into that, if we can build into that, if we can grow into that, and I'm also of the view that over time there's going to be a need for broader scale. There are a lot of incumbents in Africa, but I also want to be honest, Jeremy, they are tired. South Africa, many people don't realize this. South Africa has a history and a legacy which comes out of tourism and hospitality. If you look at the big hospitality assets which sit in this part of the world, it originated from South Africa. And there's one name which comes to mind, Sol Kerzner. What actually sits today as Atlantis One and Only were assets which germinated from South Africa. A guy went and in a homeland went and formed an entire hotel leisure playground that proliferated to the world. I believe we need to go back and see those fundamentals. We need to see that level of execution. And I think capital in this part of the world and globally needs to become a lot more intentional about what it does and why it does it.
You talk to those international investors all the time. Are you seeing a warming or a softening of attitude in that respect? Are they starting to understand the language that you're talking?
Hopefully, execution will change that. I think also the awareness is a lot more pronounced today. So I'm hoping that's going to change. I also think you've got a global world where there aren't many pockets of opportunities left. The US, I think, is done, right? You can't even build an F&B concept in New York because 95% of your cost goes into unions. Europe, I think, has a serious over-tourism challenge. You're left really with this part of the world. The Middle East has been a leader because of the policy and what it's done. And I think the next frontier sits at the global south. The next frontier sits how you connect these dots of South America, Africa, Middle East, and Asia. And that's the next corridor, which really sits as the next growth frontier.
Providing you get better, more reliable air access. And in many respects, that is a problem, particularly in inter-Africa travel. Difficult sometimes to get from one hub to another without going through two other hubs, if you understand what I'm saying. You've got to get that right.
So the two quick answers on that, obviously, is I am hoping that the global supply chain challenge, right, on air access improves. I'm also of the view that with improved technology and better propulsion, when you start finding narrow-body aircrafts being able to do long haul, I think that would be a big change. But I'm also of the view that this region is an important driver of that. I am a big fan of what Emirates has done because it's connected regions and cities. I'm a great believer with what Saudi Arabia is going to do with Riyadh Air and going to continue driving that. But I'm of the view that there'll be enough airlift, there'll be enough pockets of success. How you create that, how you curate that even further, I think will be very compelling.
So just a final question, because I see the clock is up. It's obvious that Africa doesn't need to shout louder. It needs to speak with more intentionality, the language of capital. There's got to be evidence, not aspiration. You're confident that that is starting to happen. What's the single bold move then that could cut the continent's risk premium overnight?
I think the day you have the BlackRocks, Brookfields, the KSLs, all running into Africa, the day they come, that's going to be the biggest vote of confidence. And I think that day, inshallah, will come.
Hamza Faruqi, thank you very much.
Thank you.